So dear students, let us start our new chapter that is called Diversity in Living Organisms. So students, this is going to be a very interesting chapter, however slightly lengthy it will be. Okay, but very interesting students, you are going to enjoy this chapter. So students, first of all, what are we going to study in this chapter? See students, our earth, our world, it is so huge students. There are so many continents, right? There are so many countries. It's really huge students, really huge. It will take you entire lifetime to visit all the places on earth, right? Now students, on this huge earth or world in which we live, there are so many different type of organisms. You know, leopard, giraffe, monkeys, different type of insects. Then human beings, students, we human beings are also a type of living organisms, you know. Then we have aquatic animals, students, living on this planet. Then students, we have birds, different type of birds, students, right? So the point is, there are so many types of living organisms living on this planet, students. So many different type of living organisms living on this planet, students. Look at this photograph, students. Look at this photograph. You know, you'll see, you know, various varieties of living organisms. Like you see, this is called starfish. This is a fish. This is called starfish. You know, look at this, you know, this. Plants, students, when we are talking about different living organisms living on the planet Earth, we must also talk about plants, right? Plants are also living beings, students, you know. So see, you can see different type of organisms, different type of organisms, very weird looking organisms. They stay on our Earth, they live on our Earth. So students, that is the topic of discussion in this chapter. You know, different type of living organisms are living on this planet. So that's why the name of this chapter is Diversity in Living Organisms, students. So we are going to study about these different type of organisms. In fact, students, the list is not over. This is not over. We have yet not talked about microorganisms. Microorganisms are also living organisms living on this planet, students. And by now we know about microorganisms in great detail, right? We have studied about them in different chapters, students. You know, can you give me some examples? Amoeba, you know, then bacteria, fungus, virus, right, students? These are photographs of some microorganisms, students, you know. So when we are actually talking about diversity of living organisms, different type of living organisms living on planet Earth, we should also talk about microorganisms, students. In fact, students, you must be knowing that these microorganisms live even inside our bodies, students, even inside our bodies, right? In our stomach, intestine, liver, lungs, you know, inside our body also. These microorganisms live. Microorganisms live even inside our bodies, students, right? Then students, you know, there are many animals of past as well. You know, for example, dinosaur. You know, you must have seen different movies on dinosaurs, students. So dinosaurs are animals which used to live in past. So, you know, they also add to the diversity of living organisms living on Earth. You know, when we are talking about different type of living organisms on Earth, we should also talk about animals of past, students, right? Because there are many animals, many types of animals which used to live on Earth, but today they don't exist anymore. Dinosaur is just one example, students. There are many more. You understand? So there's a huge variety. There's a huge variety of organs living on this Earth, students. That is the topic of discussion here in this chapter. Now students, before we start this chapter in full vigor, we need to get hold of this term that is called biodiversity. Biodiversity, students. Biodiversity. Now what is the meaning of this word biodiversity? Biodiversity. You know, you break this word in two parts, you'll understand its meaning. Bio, that is basically means life, and diversity means variation, right, students? So basically biodiversity means the variety of living beings on Earth, students. When we talk about biodiversity, we basically mean that different variety of living organisms or living beings live on this Earth, students. You understand? Now see, students, see, this is our world map, and this line here represents Tropic of Cancer as written here, and this line here represents Tropic of Capricorn, students, right? So if you know, students, that this region between Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, this region which is shaded, is called region of mega biodiversity. Mega biodiversity, region of mega biodiversity. Why, students? So as we've already discussed that in this world, on this planet, there are different type of living organisms. But students, specifically in this region, the variety of living organisms found is huge, is really huge, students. So the variety of living organisms, variety of plants, variety of animals which are found in this region, it is much larger compared to this area or this area, students, right? That's why this region is called region of mega biodiversity. In fact, students, let me tell you, name some of the countries, some of the important countries in this region of mega biodiversity. So they are Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Mexico, Zaire, Madagascar, Australia, China, India, Indonesia, Malaysia. So these are some important countries in this region of mega biodiversity. So in all these countries, the variety of living organisms found is huge, students. It's huge. In fact, students, I can tell you that in these countries alone, if you just take these countries, then more than 50% biodiversity exists in these countries. What it means is that if you take all these countries together, then you will be able to find 50% of the living organisms, 50% of the total living organisms, or 50% variety of the total living organisms on this earth in these countries. You understand? So if there are X variety of living organisms staying on this planet, you will find X by 2 variety in these countries itself, students. That's why this region is called region of mega biodiversity. Students, let me tell you that on this earth, around 20 lakh of different varieties of living organisms actually live. 20 lakhs is a huge number, students. In fact, there are many more. But not yet known. So basically, these 20 lakhs are the known varieties of living organisms living on earth. There may be many more which we still don't know of. And students, also remember that there were many more living in the past. Right? There were many more type of living organisms living on earth in the past, but they no more exist on earth. For example, dinosaurs, students. Now, students, I am sure that you will understand very clearly that if we have so many different type of living organisms, then it will be very difficult to study them. It will be very difficult to study all of them. Why? Because there are so many of them, more than 20 lakhs. So, if you just start reading them one by one, you will be dead by the time you are able to study all of them, students. It will take few generations of yours to study all of them. So it will be very difficult to study about all those living organisms one by one. That's why, students, we do classification. What is the meaning of classification, students? It's very simple, you will understand. We make some groups. We'll make some groups, students. Say this group 1, we'll name it, we'll put some name to this. This group 2 will also name this also. Group 3 will name this also. Say this is group 4 and so on. So we'll make some groups like this, students. Then what we are going to do, that all the living organisms which are of same type, which are not very different from each other, which have same type of properties, we'll put all of them in one group, students. We'll put all of them in one group. Then all other living organisms which are similar to each other, having common properties, we'll put them in second group. Then again we'll pick another set of organisms which are similar to each other, having similar properties, we'll put all of them in another group, and so on, students, and so on. So we'll make groups and we'll put living organisms such that all the organisms in one group are similar to each other. All the organisms in one group are similar to each other, but organisms in different groups are different from each other, right? So we can make such groups that will help us in studying all these organisms. Why? Because now we can just study this group once, and if we have studied this group once, we have basically understood all the organisms in this group, quite a bit. Not exactly, because they may still be slightly different, but still we would have understood all of them quite a bit. Similarly, if we have studied this group, it means that we know pretty much a lot of things about all the organisms in this group. You understand? So this is how we'll do the classification going ahead in this chapter, and this is how classification is useful. Here I must tell you a term that is called taxonomy. Taxonomy. What is taxonomy? Taxonomy is the science of classifying. Taxonomy is the science of classifying living organisms in different groups. Taxonomy is the science of classifying living organisms in different groups. You understand, right? What we are trying to do here is actually a taxonomy. So now, before we actually go ahead and see this classification in more detail, let us do a small question, students. So that is a question. Give 3 examples of variation in life forms on Earth. Give 3 examples of variation in life forms on Earth. So students, so many different type of organisms live on Earth, and they are of different types. So we have to give 3 examples showing those variations. So students, so the first example can be of size. There are different living organisms on Earth, and they are of different sizes. For example, think of blue whale that lives in water, in oceans. That is very huge in size, students. Very huge in size. 30 meter long. And then think of amoeba, students. There's a microorganism, so tiny you cannot even see it with naked eye. You need to use a microscope to see it. So on one hand we have blue whale, which is so large, 30 meters huge. It's as tall as a building. And on the other hand we have amoeba, which is so tiny, students. So size is one example of variation. Let me give you another. Color, students. They can be organisms of different colors. Think of elephant, practically having no color, and think of this parrot, which is so colorful, students, right? Then lifespan, students. See this tree, students. This is a very old tree, very old tree. In fact, you might have seen some very old trees in some temples, in some forests. So some trees live for thousands of years, students. But then think of mosquitoes, students. The mosquitoes live only for few days. Their lifespan is only few days. They die after few days of their birth. So once again, lifespan, that is a very good example of variation in living organisms. Some live for years, some live only for days. Now students, basis of classification. So what will the basis of classifying living organisms? So students, that will be properties. Properties or features or characteristics of the living organism. As I already told you that we'll make different groups. All the living organisms having similar features will be put in one group, then all the another organisms having similar features will be put in another group, and so on, students, right? Now what is the meaning of properties and features? So that's very easy to understand, students. Let us talk about human beings, for example. So there are many properties of human beings. For example, they live on land. We don't live in water like fishes. We don't live in air like birds. We live on land, students, right? Then we have 4 limbs. This is another feature of human beings. They have 4 limbs. Not all organisms have 4 limbs. Caterpillar. It's an insect which has like sometimes hundreds of legs. Then we have 5 fingers. 5 fingers in each limb, and the list will keep going on. So these are some of the properties or features of human beings. Similarly, other organisms will also be having different features. Based on such features we can actually classify them. Now students, making these groups, that's a real tedious task. Why? Because students, there are more than 20 lakh organisms, more than 20 lakh organisms, students. So somebody who is actually making these groups really need to know about all these organisms. Then only he can decide that in which group which organism should go. And then making these groups, naming these groups, that's a very, very difficult task. So there have been a lot of attempts in the past to make these groups to classify living organisms, and many of those attempts have been failures. Many of these attempts have been failures. One very famous attempt was something like this. There was a scientist called Aristotle. You must have heard of Aristotle. He was a great historical person basically, and also a scientist. So Aristotle, he made a very simple classification. You can see here and you can guess what type of classification he made. He made one group like this, where he kept all fishes and other organisms which were water living, which used to live in water. Then he made another group like this, and they were all air living, basically all the birds and other organisms which could actually fly. Then he made one more group which was called land living. Right? In this group, all the normal animals, insects and human beings would come. So Aristotle made a very important attempt to classify living organisms. So he made three groups: water living, air living and land living. So the name of these groups describes very clearly what is happening in these groups, students, right? So the characteristic which he used, or the feature which he used for making his groups or for classifying, was place of inhabitants. Place of inhabitants, right students, right? So in the first go, this type of classification looks very good because it's very simple also. But when we do deeper analysis, such a simple classification turns out to be a failure. Because it is actually found that many of the organisms in this group actually are very similar to organisms in this group. See, as per this classification, all the organisms in this group should have similar properties. But when deeper analysis is done, it is found that some of the fishes, some of the organisms here are very different from other organisms here. In fact, they are more similar to some of the organisms here. For example, this shark and this starfish. The only similarity between them is that both of them live in water. The only similarity between them is that they live in water. Otherwise, this shark is very similar to organisms here, which you can see here, right? So there were many problems like this. So due to which scientists gradually understood that such a simple classification is not going to work. So they went on making more complex classification, and that is what we'll try to see going ahead. You understand? So I just told you the classification done by Aristotle. Now basically we are going to study the classification which is actually used. The classification which is actually used today successfully. You understand? So straight away we will like to study that classification now. But students, before we actually go on to study that classification, we'll study some important characteristics used for classification. For this classification which is used today successfully. So we have already seen, I've already told you that for doing any classification, you need to look at the properties of the living organisms. So for this classification, what are the important properties that we look at? You understand? For doing this classification, which we use successfully today, what are the important properties or important characteristics that we look at? That is what I'll tell you first. So the first very important property which we use for classification is actually eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells. So student, I'm sure that by now you know what is the meaning of eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells. Even if you don't know, I'll explain you. Okay. See, first of all, cells. So we already know that cells are fundamental unit of life, isn't it, students? That is something we all know very clearly, that cells are also called fundamental unit of life. In fact, all the organisms, maybe it be plants or animals or whatever, they are all made up of cells, students. Very tiny cells, right? All the living organisms are actually made up of cells. Now look at these two photographs, students. Look at this cell. This is a cell, students. Here you can see, this is cytoplasm, right, students? And here this is chromosome, students. Chromosomes, right? Now look at this cell, students. This looks much more complex. This cell looks much more complex, and just by looking at the photograph, you can understand this is a much simpler cell, right? Now this is a complex cell, students. It has many structures. It has cytoplasm, this is a chromosome. This is chromosome, right? And this entire structure which you are seeing here in greenish is actually called nucleus. And this is a very important part of a cell, students. Very important part of the cell. And then you can see so many other small things. We will not get into details of all these right now, but they all are together called organelles. You understand, students? So you can see this is a much more complex type of cell, having much more different type of organelles inside itself. But this is a much simpler cell, students. Also, there is very important point here, that these organelles are membrane bound. For example, look at this nucleus, students. So see, this is a membrane around this nucleus, right? So this is what we are actually talking about. This is another organelle, and there is a membrane surrounding it. You understand? Such membranes are not found in such simple cells, students, right? So here the organelles are well defined. We can say that, see, this is a membrane. Anything inside that membrane is actually our organelle, right? So this is a membrane. Anything inside this membrane is our nucleus, right? So here the organelles are membrane bound. So they are very well defined. Now, students, think about it, that some of the living organisms are actually made up of such cells, such complex and advanced type of cells. So some living organisms are actually made up of such type of cells. Even we human beings are made up of such type of cells. But some living organisms are actually made up of this simple cells. So what do you think? See, very clearly you will be able to think that organisms which are made up of such cells should be simple. And organisms which are made up of such type of cells must be complex and advanced type of organisms, isn't it? Right, students? And in fact, I can write it down that organisms made up of eukaryotic cells are very different from organisms made up of prokaryotic cells. You understand? So organisms which are made up of these type of cells are very different compared to organisms which are made up of these type of simple cells, right? So this is one property which is used to do classification. You understand? This is one very important property which is used to do classification. In fact, this is the most basic property, right? This is the most basic property which is used to do classification, right? We all know that cells are the most basic structures of any living organism, students, right? So if we are doing a classification based on the type of cell, then obviously we are using the most basic possible property. You understand? Anyways, you understand that we are going to see the classification which is used currently, and for doing that classification many different type of characteristics are used. One characteristic is this, that whether the organism is made up of eukaryotic cell or from prokaryotic cell. Now, students, let us discuss the second very important property or characteristic which will be used for the classification, and that is body organization. So see, students, we very well know that some organisms are actually unicellular and some are actually multicellular, right? Unicellular, for example, amoeba, students. Amoeba is an example of unicellular organism. Multicellular, leopards, human beings, elephants, hydra, these are examples of multicellular organisms. So students, you also know what is the meaning of unicellular. Unicellular means made up of single cell, right? Made of one single cell. And multicellular means made up of many cells. Many cells. Right, students? So clearly you can understand that this is a very important property, that whether an organism is actually made up of a single cell or it is made up of many cells. So this is also an important property which is used to do classification. Let me describe this in more detail for you. See students, we know that living organisms are actually made up of cells, and these cells actually combine to form tissues, right? We have seen this in previous classes and previous chapters, that cells combine to form tissues, and then tissues combine to form organs, right? Then organs combine to form organ systems, right? And then there are many organ systems in a organism. So see students, in some organisms you will find that the story ends at cells only. For example, amoeba. In amoeba there are no tissues, no organs, and no organ systems. Amoeba has a single cell. It has a single cell. So there is no concept of cells grouping to form tissues, right? Tissues will be formed when a lot of cells combine. They group together to form tissues. But in amoeba there is a single cell. There is a single cell. So there is no concept of tissue. So there are many organisms which have just one single cell. And this single cell performs all activities of life. All activities of life for them, right? So obviously these type of organisms will be very different, from somebody like leopard. See, leopard is a very complex organism. It has a lot of cells. They combine to form tissues, then many tissues combine to form organs, many organs combine to form organ systems, and then there are many organ systems in this leopard. So you can see that the body organization of this leopard is far more complex, far more advanced compared to that of amoeba, right? So you can understand that definitely this amoeba should go in a different group, and then this leopard should go in a different group. You understand? So this is the second property, body organization, which will help us in doing the classification. Now the third important property which is used for classification is mode of obtaining food, students. For example, let us take these three organisms. Here we have plants. Here you can see we have a rabbit. Then here we have a lion, students. See, this plant is making its food from sunlight. Students. Isn't it? This rabbit is eating another plant for food. And this lion is eating another animals for food, right, students? So you can see that different organisms obtain their food in different manner. So this property is a very important property which is going to be used for classification, students, right? In fact, you must be familiar with these words. Autotrophs. Plants are called autotrophs, and these animals are called heterotrophs. What are autotrophs, students? Autotrophs are organisms which make their own food by photosynthesis. Autotrophs are organisms which make their own food by photosynthesis as plants. And what are heterotrophs? They depend on other organisms for food. Like this rabbit. This rabbit is depending on plants. So plant is another organism. So this rabbit is dependent on another organism for food. This lion is dependent on other organisms for food. Right? So they are called heterotrophs. This plant, it is not dependent on another organisms for food. It makes its own food using sunlight through the process of photosynthesis, which we are very much familiar with, students, right? So we'll see that these properties will be used for classification. In fact, students, you must be knowing that the word auto means self. So autotrophs, it makes its food by its own self. Hetero means different. So these organisms are dependent on different living organisms for their food. Right. So students, basically now we are about to see the classification which we have been talking about. So that's why I put the heading hierarchy of classification. But before we actually go on to do that classification, it will be very great of us and very good of us if we could remember those scientists who have put extreme efforts in doing the classification which we are going to study, students, right? So first scientist which we must talk about is Linnaeus. He's also called father of taxonomy, students. So he was a scientist who gave the first meaningful classification of living organisms. Though we do not use his classification today, but the classification which we use today is very much based on what he told. If not exactly the same, right? And that's why he's called father of taxonomy, students, right? Then there were many more scientists who came later on, and they gave their very valuable contribution, right, students? This person, but this person is perhaps the most significant because the classification which we use today was actually given by him. Mr. Robert, right, students? So let us see what he did. So students, he made hierarchies. So these are the hierarchies he made. You need to remember them. I'm going to explain you what are all these hierarchies. You will understand them very clearly. Kingdom, then phylum or division. Now, what is the meaning of A and P here? I'll tell you after some time. Class, order, family, genus, species. So these are the hierarchies he made. So let me explain what is mean by this. So basically, first of all, he made kingdoms. And he made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kingdoms. Very important, student. How many kingdoms he made? 5. This is very important. How many kingdoms he made? 5. So basically, he made kingdoms, and all the living organisms which he knew of, he put them in these 5 kingdoms. So basically, he divided all the living organisms in 5 different groups, right? Which he called kingdoms. You understand? So he made 5 classifications or 5 groups called kingdoms, and he put all the living organisms in these different kingdoms. Then, if we take any kingdom, he further divided this kingdom in different phylum or division. Right, students? And all the organisms which were there in this kingdom, he further divided them in small groups. And those small groups were called phylum or division. Now, if that group had only animals, he called them phylum. And if that group had only plants, he called it division. Just a small thing. If that group had only plants, he called it division. And if that group had only animals, he called it phylum. You understand? Then, a single phylum or division was further divided into many small groups. And they were called class. Students. You understand what is going on here? Then one class had many organisms, and they were further divided into many small groups. That was called order. You understand? And then one order was further divided into many small groups. That was called family. And then one family was further divided into small groups. That was called genus. And then a genus had different type of organisms. One genus is a group. It's a group, so it had different type of organisms. So these are different type of organisms, and each organism was called a species. So he made a hierarchy. Like this. The same thing was done with all the kingdoms. So this kingdom will have lots of animals or plants. So what he's going to do, that he's going to divide them into different groups, which will be called phylum or division. Then further he's going to divide every phylum into classes, then order, then family, then genus, then a species. You understand? So I hope that you can understand that all the animals or plants in one kingdom are similar to each other, but they are different from animals or plants of different kingdom, right? But students, if we talk about phylums, so in one phylum, the animals or plants in one phylum will be more similar to each other than animals or plants of a kingdom. Similarly, organisms of a class will be more similar than organisms of a phylum. Organisms of an order will be more similar than organisms of a higher hierarchy like class or phylum or kingdom. You understand? So organisms of a genus will be very similar to each other. But organisms of family will be similar to each other but less similar compared to genus. You understand what is going on? So first he made a broad classification, kingdom, and then he further divided kingdom into small groups and further into small groups and so on. So it's a big tree like a structure, students, and it's, if you see, it is pretty complicated. It had to be like this because there were so many different type of organisms, students, more than 20 lakhs, more than 20 lakhs. So it had to be like this only. Let me give you some examples to make you explain this, to make you understand this. So students, look at these organisms, students. This is tiger, lion, jaguar, leopard. You must have seen all of them on Discovery Channel or at some other places. They all look very similar to each other actually. So they are different species. They are different species, students. They are different species. Tiger is one species, lion is another species, jaguar is another species, leopard is another species. They are different species, students, right? They all are in the group. They are all in one group. They are all in one genus. They are all in one genus, students. They are all in one genus. I told you that in one genus, there will be many species. So all these species lie in one genus, and the name of that genus is Panthera. So Panthera is a group, it's a genus which has a lot of species, and these species are very similar to each other. They even look very similar to each other if you see. Right? So Panthera is the genus in which all these species are there. Then there's a family called Fetida. So this genus is a small group of this family. So you saw that a family is divided into many small groups called genus. So Fetida is a family, genus is one group of that family, and there will be more genus. You can understand there will be more genus into that family. So there will be more organisms in that family. So like cat, cheetah, and there are many more organisms in that family. One of the groups of this family is Panthera. Right, students? Then above Panthera we'll have order. Carnivora, students. Carnivora. So this is an order, and Fetida is one family in that order. There are many more families, so many more animals will come in this order, students. You understand? Then above order we'll have class, students. Class. So the class here is Mammalia. So Carnivora is one group in this class that is called Mammalia. And obviously there will be many more animals in this class like camel, kangaroo, and so many other animals. Then above it will come, students, phylum, because we are talking about animals. Phylum. And the name of that phylum is Chordata. So Chordata is a phylum. It has many classes. One of them is actually Mammalia. And there are many more classes through which animals like snake and fish will also be part of this phylum. And above this phylum, students, we have kingdom. And the name of that kingdom is Animalia. Insects are also part of this kingdom. So you understand, students, how this hierarchy is going on. That is what we are talking about. So if we talk about, so at the bottom we have species. Different species form a group that is called genus. Then such many genus like this will form a group that is called family. Then many families like this will form an order. Many orders like this will form a class. Many classes like this will form a phylum. Many phylums like this will form a kingdom, students. You understand? Let me give you one more example. So this is example, students. There's a lot of data on this slide, but don't be confused. You will understand it very clearly. So here we are actually going to talk about ourselves, students. So it is going to be interesting. Human beings. See, this is a human being, student. This is a human being. Now we are a species like tiger, as we talked in the last example. We are also a species. And students, you will be surprised to know that look at these photographs. They must be looking to you similar to human beings, but they are not human beings. Students, very interestingly, long back on this planet Earth, many more organisms used to live, and they used to look very much like us. Look at this organism, look at this organism. They are not human beings. But they look very similar to human beings. So long back, many such organisms used to live on Earth, students, right? So these are different species. They are different species, just like us. So different species like us. So right now, just focus on this part of the slide. Just focus on this part of the slide. If you focus on the entire slide, you will not understand. Just focus on this part of the slide. So long back on Earth, there were many different type of species like this. Different species like us. So they are all different species, students. Right? Now together they all form a group that is called genus. After species, we have genus. And this genus is called Homo. Name of this genus is Homo. So basically, students, we are a species, and there were many species like us once upon a time on Earth, and these all species are grouped in a single genus. That is called Homo. Then above genus we'll have family. So this genus Homo comes in the family Homonids. Look here. Homonids. And obviously there will be many more organisms in this family. Apart from these, there will be many more organisms in this family. Some of them are like chimpanzee, gorilla, orangutan. So these are also in this family of Homonids. Then after family we'll have order. So the order in which this family comes is called primitives. So this Homonids family comes in this order, primitives, and obviously there are many more organisms in this order. All monkey type of organisms actually come in this order, students. Then above order we have class. So this order comes in the class called Mammalia. And obviously there are many more organisms in this class like camel, elephant, kangaroo, and so on. And this class comes in the phylum Chordata. If you remember, even the last example we were talking about the same phylum, Chordata. See, phylum Chordata. Even tiger was coming finally in this phylum. So here also this Mammalia class comes in this phylum that is called Chordata, and obviously there are many more animals like snakes and fishes in it. And this phylum Chordata is one of the phylums of the kingdom Animalia, in which many more organisms like insects will also come. You understand? So such hierarchies were made. And this is a type of classification which we actually use. You might think that this is very complicated, but don't be worried about it, students. It is definitely slightly complicated, but we don't need to worry, because in our syllabus, in this course, we are only going to talk about these 5 kingdoms which we have and the phylums or divisions. These are only 2 things which we are going to talk about. Some of the times we'll talk about class, very few of the times we'll talk about class, and this rest of the things, order, family, genus, and species, we will not be talking about them, right, students? So, because if we talk about them, the course will be too lengthy, and anyway that is not in your course, right? These are some things which we study in higher classes. So in this course we are only going to talk about kingdom and phylum, so you can understand that things will not be very complicated for you. I've given you this example and the example of tiger just for the fact that you can understand the entire hierarchy system, and you can also understand how